1842, or even in 1847, even in 1900, whenever the prevailing understanding is that everyone was illiterate and that everyone was unsophisticated, uncivilized is the word they like to use. They just think it was a bunch of, as they believe, savages running around without any way of, without any form of literacy. And it is, the theme of the Liberian History Channel to continuously and repeatedly stress the fact that the people who were living on the Grain Coast were very sophisticated, and they were not isolated, some isolated population that was not aware of interacting with people from the outside world. The interaction between West Africa and Europe goes back to ancient Rome. Liberia, the Grain Coast, is part of West Africa. And many historians consider West Africa to be the southern stretches of the Roman Empire. The gold trade, the trade in human beings across the Sahara, the trade in ivory, the trade in all kinds of goods and other things, agriculture, started initially across the Sahara before the Atlantic even came into play. So our region for a very long time has been interacting with Europe and Asiatic people. And we had a writing system, and we borrowed, of course, Arabic. And Arabic is something that wasn't only used to write the Arabic language, but as you'll see when we continue the show today, they also use Arabic characters to write their own languages. This is something that most people don't realize. The same way we use the Roman characters today to write, if we're going to write Grebo, if we're going to write Mono, or we're going to write any other language, we can use the characters that we use to write English. It's also very important to mention that the characters that we use to write the English language are not Western European, they're Roman characters. And those characters that we use, so English is a pre-literate language, meaning the English language does not have its own script, the way how Vi has its own script. So the French language does not have its own script. They use the script of their conquerors. Many people around the world do this. So this is very important to understand. So even the English language being in the written form is as a result of being conquered by Rome. They never evolved to the point of inventing their own script. So we always like to say, oh, the people were illiterate, they weren't reading and writing. Well, neither were the British, neither were the French, neither were the Germans. These people, the Russians, they're all using a script that they borrowed as well from Rome.
Great. Well,
he said great. So I need to put that out there because people always like, oh, yeah, I ain't getting no writing system. Well, but we'll get into this.
Right, and I can relate to that because even with the little Grebo that I write, I'm using the same ABC that we all use, right?
Right.
So it makes sense to me.
So just important to say again that using the Arabic script to write not only Arabic, but also write indigenous African languages. This is very important because even I, for a very long time, thought that all of the Arabic scripts were written in Arabic language, and they're not, which is why it took scholars all kinds of hell and heartache trying to figure out how to translate the scripts, the correspondence, the manuscripts that were written. Some are written in Arabic, though, but some are not.
So again, let me announce our topic, 19th century correspondence from the interior of Liberia. I like the picture.
Yeah, it's a sketch from one of the towns in the northern region of Liberia, probably in modern day Bopolu County.
So there's an autographed letter signed from Joseph Jacob Roberts to Theodore Dwight, notifying Dwight that he will be receiving an additional Arabic manuscript sent by Roberts.
Yes. So almost immediately, they were having interactions with people that were long distance traders from the north because these people had been coming down to the coast from the interior with lots of goods for a very long time. And the traders, some of them were literate. Some of them were messengers, and they would carry information back to their kings, to their leaders, and it would say, oh, when it came Maserati to go trade with King Peter Brumley has told us that we can no longer bring slaves. In fact, they have some westernized Negroes, and I think they call them Tubatus or something like that. They have some westernized Black people on the coast that have seized all of our slaves and liberated them. They're saying they no longer allow slave trade in the territory. So they will go back to the interior and report things. They don't want us to bring human beings, but they're willing to trade in calico. They want us to bring gold. They want us to bring other goods. So we no longer, so blocking the transatlantic slave trade at places like Cape Meserado and Cape Mount, Robertsport, caused a frenzy in the north. So they had to go in and kind of change things. This sort of kicked off the correspondence. So the kings would then write back, what right have you to stop our trade? You know, these kinds of letters would be coming back down to the coast. And Roberts, you know, utilized, when he was president, he utilized, and everyone knows the story of Stephen Allen Benson, we'll get to that, but Roberts took these letters, and often Theodore Dwight was an abolitionist in the United States, a scholar, and also had a lot of access to Islamic and what they would call Asiatic scholars that study the Arabic language here in the United States. So Roberts would put the correspondence together, and they would send them for translation and other things. Later on, when Blyden comes, he learns Arabic, and he starts to translate these things on the behalf of Liberian government. But this particular letter, this is an actual copy or image of Joseph Jenkins Roberts' actual handwriting. And this was written on July, I think it says July 3rd, 1864. This is when this letter was written, and Benson would have been president at that time. And Roberts still continued to, I think it says 1864. Anyway, Roberts still continued to, or does it say 1861?
Yeah, it looks like July 31st, 1861, or July 3rd.
Yeah, I think it is 1861. You're right. My eyesight, I got to be writing in old cursive again. So.
Yes, sir. I enclose to you.
Yeah, I enclose to your, I can't see any of that stuff. I have to blow it up. But there's a lot of these letters, these manuscripts that are held at New York University, Sheffield Museum, Library of Congress. They're kind of spread out all over the place. And these things come from within the interior of Liberia. It's very important. Some of them talk about the history of their people. They name their kings in succession, who was the king before this king and the king before that one, and so on. And it's just important for us as a country to get these documents and help tell the entire story of our people, because the misunderstanding that we didn't write our own history clearly isn't true. We did.
Right. And I posted on my own Facebook page the cover of the book Guyana Power, right? By Joseph Jeffrey Waters, a Liberian. I think it's written 18 something, right? And I'm like, so why nobody told us about this book when I was in grade school?
I don't know. It's a novel. It's not a history book.
Yeah, it's a novel.
But he's the first African to write a novel in the English language.
Yes.
To write a work of fiction in the English language.
And that was my point, right? So this important. We are in Liberia. I mean, we reading the Things Fall Apart, good book, reading it from cover to cover. But yet we have a Liberian who wrote the first Black to write a novel in English. And
the first African.
Yeah, the first African. And we don't even know about it. It's not taught. So it's the same thing. If we have these letters, why did we not know that our people were writing at that time?
Yeah, this is a good question.
Yeah, thank God for
it. I mean, Dennis, it's really difficult for me to even begin to pretend I understand what's going on. We've have a lot of theories we've discussed on this program. I know that history is a very powerful tool to build the esteem of a country. And if you want people to be broken, you sever them from the roots. And if you want people to get an inferiority complex, the easiest way to do that is to sever them from the roots. And I think the prevailing understanding of our people is that they didn't do anything, they didn't know anything, and other people came and filled them. They were empty. And I've even had to ask an adult, oh, the people came and denied us citizenship. And I'm like, that the sentence, just saying that is bizarre. Not understanding that when people come and settle on the coast, it doesn't mean that your ancestors wanted to be like them. They respected themselves. They had their own countries, their own citizenship. And I had to tell them it wasn't African Americans that brought the concept of nationhood and citizenship to Africa. The people already belonged to their own countries, their own kingdoms, their own nations. And the reason we have this way of thinking about ourselves is because it's been told to us that we didn't have anything. So this is, and you would only believe that if you don't have any evidence to the contrary. And the evidence to the contrary is tremendous. It is tremendous. So this is an excerpt from a correspondence that was published in the Liberia Herald. You can go ahead, Dennis.
Correspondence.
And the sketch, before you read, I'm sorry, the sketch there of the Madinka warrior. He was a bodyguard for one of the convoys that would bring goods to the coast. So they would have these warriors accompany their caravans, their trade caravans. And someone sketched him, so I wanted to just put that there for that purpose. But go ahead, please.
And this correspondent opening with the interior of Africa. We noticed a few months ago some elegant African manuscripts received in this city, procured from President Benson and ex-President Roberts of Liberia, from educated Negroes visiting the coast. They have been universally admired for their neatness, uniformity, and distinctness, and their content, as translated by Reverend Dr. Isaac Bird of Hartford, are curious, interesting, and instructive, proving the strong Mohammedan faith of the writers, their knowledge of some things, and their ignorance of distant countries, but their thirst for knowledge.
So this is just an excerpt. So just imagine this. They're on the coast. And these scholars, they call them educated.
Yeah.
Coming from the interior. They're calling them educated. They're coming from the interior. And they brought correspondence from their king to the coast. What provoked this? The change, the shift in the culture. The trade partners had been Peter Brumley, people like that. Now things have changed. Well, what's going on? We have to protect our trade. So they're coming almost as ambassadors. They're coming as ambassadors. And this is before independence.
Yeah. This is
after, and now this is after independence. Now we're getting into, so these letters, this correspondence, before you read, and this is a very rare picture of President Roberts that I love. This picture is one of my favorite pictures of President Roberts you hardly ever see. But before we get into reading this, I just want to mention that between the 1830s and 1868, when Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson goes in the interior, there were many, many letters of correspondence written to the Liberian government from various kings. So it wasn't just one group. So it would have been the father or someone who was the king of Bopuru region, probably the father-in-law of King Momoru, who comes later, writing. And then you would have had also people coming from other directions besides up St. Paul River into Bopuru. You also had people writing from east of that region in the north as well. So you had all of these correspondents as far north as Musardu coming down to the coast saying, hey, what gives? What's going on? Things are happening up here. The world is shifting. Wars are being fought. Trying to make diplomatic connections with the people on the coast, and also establish trade relationships. So by 1863, Roberts writes Theodore Dwight, Esquire.
He said, I have the honor of your favor, dated May 3, 1863, evidently a mistake in the month, handed to me a few days ago by President Benson. I feel much gratified that the Arabic manuscript to which you refer has in any way contributed to produce favorable impressions respecting the condition of some of the native tribes east of Liberia. I'm also pleased with your suggestion to the secretaries of the AM Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions in regard to the distribution of Arabic books and tracts through Liberia. Among these tribes, I feel fully satisfied that good and lasting results will follow.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So they basically have these foreign missionaries that are going in and trying to set up relationships. They're trying to advance Western cultural ideas, and they're also interacting with people who do not welcome this. And you're talking about east of Liberia, which basically means to the northern eastern region, which would be modern day Bong and Nimba. So what we later on call the North or the North and Central Territory. Here you have people, leaders in this region, corresponding in the Arabic script. And they're also distributing Arabic books and tracts throughout Liberia. Of the Bible in Arabic, because they're aware that these people can read and write Arabic, or at least the high priest and the scholars and the leaders can. This is not something people talk about on a daily basis about Liberian history. That the missionaries were translating things first into Arabic before they were translating it into Basa or Gribble or Mano or Kran or any of our other languages. That they were first translating into Arabic because that was what was written. That was the writing system that the people were commonly using. West Africa has a 900-year relationship with Islam and Arabic. The cultural impact of the Arab world is still present. We've talked about this on other shows. But the writing system, it's very important to know that even if they were using the script, that sometimes they would use the script to also write their own indigenous language, not only Arabic. So what I want to emphasize with this slide, with this particular quote, Roberts is Roberts is very interested, or mostly interested, in spreading the doctrine of Christianity, and he's pleased that the board commissions of foreign missions, which is, distributing these Arabic Bibles basically throughout these areas. It's not because Roberts is interested in having a cultural exchange. It's because Roberts wants to push Christianity and Western ideals. And we can go to the next slide if you don't have any questions on this.
Yeah. On my return to Monrovia, December last, I found here the diploma from the maybe American Ethnological Society, which you were good enough to send me through Reverend Mr. Pitney. I'm highly gratified at the distinction thus conferred, and I beg, sir, you will do me the favor to present my best acknowledgement to the society and assure them of my high appreciation of the honor they have done me by electing me a corresponding member of their association. It will afford me much pleasure to communicate to you from time to time anything of interest coming under my observation and worthy of being transmitted to you. Indeed, I think it probably that in a few months I shall be able to send you something, as a friend of mine is about making a visit to the interior and who has promised to procure for me any Arabic manuscripts he may find in his travels likely to prove interesting. Yours very respectfully, J.J. Roberts. I
So
wonder
this is,
what is
go
this that
ahead.
you're finding interesting?
Because they were completely ignorant about what was happening beyond where they controlled. So as people are writing them, they're learning more about what's going on in the interior. They haven't been there.
Okay.
If you remember from other episodes, they had what did Benjamin Anderson? So 5 years after this is written, Benjamin Anderson goes. But what they had there was a wall of what did he say? Of non-penetration, meaning that they had put up a wall to keep the Liberians where they were. They were not allowed to leave that area and have any influence or even visit. So Seymour tried, but Anderson was the first. Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson was the first non-African born person to really get into the interior and go and even meet with King Momoru. But King Momoru knew everything that was going on the coast because he had his people there all the time. So they were in complete understanding of the Liberian government, what was happening there. They understood everything that was happening on the coast, but the people on the coast did not know what was happening in the interior. And when you read a narrative of a journey to Musaru, you get to realize that they knew exactly what Anderson was there for, and everybody was aware of what was happening, and they were aware of Liberia, but Liberia was not aware of the nations that were within their perceived territory because they had never penetrated into the interior.
Hmm. So what would be some of the things they will find interesting? Maybe how marriage is done, how
I
many
don't think these
subjects?
letters were so much about those kind of cultural things. I think it was more about trade
Okay.
and military and wars, and we've conquered these people, or we've done this, and our king wants you to know that this is happening, and we're going to be able to, they would write back and tell their I would say ambassadors, we would be very interested in learning more. They would bring, sample gold, for example, to the coast. Is it something that you would like to trade with us? Absolutely. Great king of Boparu, we want to trade in gold. So this is the kind of thing that was happening. And this correspondence really was initiated by the kings of the interior. And welcoming them, especially when these wars, as you'll see later, start happening, saying, hey, we need each other. We need each other. We need each other to survive. So there was and I want everyone to go back and watch the episode of King Momoru from Boparu. Because this is somebody whose name should be a household name in Liberia, not Sao Poso, not Zoluduma. It should be King Momoru of Boparu. You talk about powerful influences on the Republic of Liberia. King Momoru, during the period that the Republic existed, was the most powerful king. during the period that the Liberian government existed. And the fact that we don't even talk about King Momoru is strange, very strange, that he's not a common, part of the Liberian curriculum. We don't have King Momoru anything, but we have, Zolu Duma Bridge, when Zolu Duma and, wasn't even the same King Peter. We've talked about that before. So the disregard for accuracy and attention to indigenous history is not because it doesn't exist. It's just because it does. It's very blatant. I mean, Blyden wrote detailed things about King Momoru. King Momoru was he spoke English. He was literate himself. So it's just strange that a lot of this is left out of the conventional curriculums for our students.
And we'll continue to ask why.
And then one of my favorite Liberians of all time, Stephen Allen Benson. This is another rare photograph. So Dennis Ja, just so you know, History Channel will be putting all kind of rare photos of our people. The other picture of Roberts, very few people have seen that. And now this is another rare photo of Benson, of President Benson that many don't see. I always try to reveal these on your show. But this is
Benson and I should have some relationship. We're related, yeah.
So this day, man, he was adopted by King Peter Brumley and his wife, and they maintained a relationship until King Peter Brumley died. And then, unfortunately, Stephen Allen Benson, I think, died before King Peter Brumley's wife, but that was basically his mother. They maintained a close relationship. If you all know that he was kidnapped by King Peter's military militia when he was 6 years old, and he was taken with other children from the settlement hostage, and they took care of him. When they took him, he was sick, probably had malaria. They just say he had African fever. And they treated him for his illness. They released the other children, but Stephen was so sickly, and Brumley's wife was so attached to Stephen, she didn't let him go right away. She wanted to nurse him fully back to health. I believe they saved his life. One of the other things they did was they sent a messenger when they had these children in their custody and said, but the children refusing to eat our food. What do they eat? What do you feed the children? So they had to tell them, give them some of this, some of that. So they had to learn how to cook food for him. Eventually, Stephen started eating the same food they were eating with his hands. And it's inferred that he was likely initiated before returning to the settlement. A lot of times during his life, his young adulthood, when Buchanan was still governor, Stephen would be sent to negotiate because he spoke the language. And he would be sent to negotiate if there was any conflicts or anything. And then there was a excerpt where he was said, we'll send you with some militia guys with some weapons. And Stephen said, no, I'll go alone, unarmed. And he went on Bushrod Island, which at the time was not part of any control of the territory. They were still somewhat autonomous. He would go there into the forest. The whole place was a rainforest. He would go to King Peter Brumley's town and negotiate with the people unarmed and come back because he was part of them. So Benson was also considered by the kings as part of themselves. And I believe that's because he was initiated into their society. I believe he was initiated into Poro. And so this is why he was allowed to interact with them and behave almost as an ambassador to the Liberians and be able to receive correspondence directly. And he was very, this was something that was just known of him, that he was the person. So that's why you see Roberts constantly referring back to President Benson.
Yeah.
Oh, I received this from Benson. I received that from Benson. Because even before he became president, he was that ambassador. He was that honorary day guy.
So he
And he looked
became the
like a day
bridge.
boy too. He looked day or Vi or something. Day
Yeah.
Gola or Vi could pass, except for his clothes, maybe. So this is a letter that Benson wrote. Um, and you can go ahead when you're ready.
Benson said, on my return home early in May from an official tour down the coast, I received your favor of the 24th January, which came by the break promise, and I would have replied by her a fortnight ago, but for ill health and a pressure of business. I fully concur with you in the opinion you expressed, respecting the intellectual constitution of some of the Mohammedan tribes east of us, and the incalculable good that might be affected by circulating through Liberian or native agency among them, publications, however small, in the Arabic language, descriptive, descriptive of civilized countries, illustrated by small maps with information concerning the customs, arts, sciences, and Christianity of those countries. I will greatly rejoice to see such a plan put into execution, and devoted as I am and hope to be through future public life to the welfare of my race in particular. I will gladly contribute whatever aid I could in furtherance of so noble and philanthropic an object. An object, yeah. Please be assured, sir, that I will employ due effort to procure for you the desired Arabic manuscript and will forward them to your address so soon as I shall have succeeded. With sentiments of highest regard, I have the honor to subscribe myself most respectfully, your able servant.
Stephen Allen Benson.
Hey,
Well, you're
Steve.
old 1970.
Hmm.
So I want to point out he was still sickly in 1860 when he wrote this. He said, "Oh, ill health." So it just goes back to the fact that when those ships arrived with those children, the conditions were dirty. This is the 1800s. They did not understand microbiology yet. So a lot of people were spreading tuberculosis and all kinds of other respiratory ailments. And also, they didn't understand what malaria was. They just called it African fever. So Benson probably had some respiratory problems from his childhood that were, though he may have been cured of whatever illness, it probably left some lasting effects. He also died very young. So though they kept him alive and they were able to nurse him back with the traditional medicines at King Peter Brumley's time when he was a child, he still lived his life as a sickly adult. And he was very much, if you see, he says, for the advancement, what did he say? What were the exact words of his race, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is very clearly an Africanist. He doesn't see himself as different from the people that he's speaking of. And even when you read Benson's speeches, he doesn't see himself as any different from the people he's speaking of. He's talking about the advancement of his race. He's not saying, oh, those native people. He's saying,
Yeah.
and this is one of the things I always want to point out to people, is that the people who built the country, who established the republic, the way they thought of themselves, they went to Africa because, as they would consistently say, this is Africa and we are Africans. These are their words. Now, the great-great-grandchildren might be saying different things, but they themselves saw themselves as Africans. And here he is saying, hey, I would gladly do this. They understood there was a cultural difference. And they understood that everyone is not the same culture, even among the people. But he's saying here very clearly the advancement of his race, of his people.
Yeah.
And this is consistent language with Benson, consistent language with Warner, consistent language with many of our early presidents and leaders.
Then comes Blyden.
Another rare photograph, Dennis.
Oh, yeah. This is
Today is rare photograph day.
this is his gribble side.
Yeah, you look like K Palmer's man.
Yeah, it look
And
like
yeah, even K Palmer's Genitabo. So
in the
now this is interesting that anyway, go ahead and read and I'll tell you what I think.
in the meantime, Blyden developed a strong interest in the native peoples of Liberia, particularly the Manichae, who sensitized him to Islam and the Arabic language that he began to study. In 1866, he obtained funding from the American Colonization Society and various British missionary associations to visit Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, cutting short his 1864 appointment as Liberian Secretary of State. He hoped to perfect his knowledge of Arabic and of Islamic culture and to observe the Negro heritage of ancient Egypt. Returning to Monrovia, he added Arabic to the curriculum of Liberia College, despite the opposition of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, now the college president.
So Roberts being the head of, he started the University of Liberia, it was called Liberia College at the time. Roberts was extremely conservative and believed that this thing that Blyden and Stephen Allen Benson and Daniel Bashir Warner them were up for, he was not up for it, right? He did not want cultural integration. He wanted cultural conversion. He wanted people to change and become, in his mind, more modern, more Western. He didn't think that it was right for people to become Muslim, to become Africanized in that sense, and Arabized. He really said that, hey, this is not African culture either, though it had been around for, centuries. Yeah. And the truth is, most people were not Muslim. Islam was practiced, but most people practiced traditional faith. And in the North and Central region, in the Northern and Central Territory, and also Western part, most of the focus right now, before Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson comes in, most of their focus is the places that we call Bong and Nimba in that region. When they say Eastern Mohammedan tribes, they're really talking about Eastern Mende ethnic groups. And as we know, the majority of these Mende people were not Muslim. However, they were, their leaders and their kings were people who would study. And this thing we discussed with fluidity of ethnicity, we'll get into it a little bit more, but we talked about it a lot. If you go back and watch the episodes about Samori Toure and how the whole ethnic shift happens. But here you have a situation where Blyden is bringing the curriculum to the university. He later becomes the University of Liberia president after Roberts. He puts the curriculum there. My understanding is that the Arabic language was being learned by the most elite in Liberia. People wanted to do trade, they wanted to do business, so they would learn the language, they would learn how to write, and it's the exact same reason many ethnic groups adopted it, whether they were Muslim or not. Contrary to what people believe, the writing system was adopted sometimes without the religion being adopted. And I didn't understand that until very recently. And when you go back and you read the confusion, they'll say, "Oh, this person is writing Arabic, and this person doesn't go to the mosque. This person doesn't believe in, this person doesn't pray. What's going on?" Well, it's because you wanted to be able to communicate and be able to write your thoughts and ideas.
Like saying today, since you write English and speak English, you're a Christian.
Right. And then people who are Muslim will still be at this time are also learning how to read and write English, and they're not giving up their religion. Yeah. This is that caused a lot of Liberians, for example, Cape Mount, you had a lot of these Muslim kings that would send their sons to the Christian schools so that they could learn to read and write the English language, and and speak the English language. And what ends up happening is a lot of them, like Gardner, Bishop Gardner, whose father was a Muslim king. Bishop Gardner then converts to Christianity, abandons Islam, and can never go among his people again, but he goes on to become the first African bishop, right? So we've talked about Bishop Gardner's story on the History Channel. So people go and they adopt, they send their Muslim children to these Christian schools to learn and come back home for purposes of trade and understanding. And sometimes those children would adopt Christianity. Likewise, some indigenous chiefs would send their children to these Arabic schools to learn, and then they would adopt Islam. Because along with the teaching at that time came with the indoctrination into religion.
Yeah.
So it took very few people would go and then say, you know what, thank you for the education, but I'm bouncing, I'm leaving. if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I employ my leisure time in teaching a school of 14 persons from the ages of 7 to 50 years. Their proficiency was truly astonishing, and in the space of 6 weeks, boys who had never seen a book nor could speak a word of English were in words of 5 syllables. Their attention was most regular and their deportment correct. The eldest pupil was a Mandingo, who, when he found it difficult to retain the English sound, would write it in the Arabic characters and by that means was enabled to pronounce it accurately. John Pitney writes from Cape Masurado, January 1834.
So this is very significant. I've used this because I want to demonstrate how this education system that was being borrowed worked. He used the Arabic characters to write English. He used the Arabic characters to write the English language, and that would enable him to pronounce the words accurately. John Pitney writes this in 1834. This is what they were doing with indigenous languages as well. Before the Vice script, they were writing it in Arabic. You have manuscripts of Vai language being written with Arabic characters. You have manuscripts with Bambara being written in Arabic characters. So this student that was learning English, this young scholar, had already, Dennis, you there? He had already understood how to read and write Arabic so well. He had learned to read and write Arabic to the extent that he was now able to write English as he was learning it. Write the sounds in Arabic so that he could pronounce them correctly in English. I thought that was powerful. And these were actual children that he was working with, not adult students, but children. And in the picture on the right of the two boys, this was taken around 1890. And this was taken in modern day Bong County. And these are Mandinka students at an Islamic school. So this isn't related to 1834. This is many, many years later. But this photo is from Bong County. And these are, and I always like to refer to them as remnants of Wosulu Empire, of Samori Touré's empire, because you had that descendant of huge influx of people escaping French colonialism that entered into Liberia and were welcomed into the forest region by their other Mende-speaking cousins who spoke Pella and Manu and Loma and all these things. So you see a huge influx of a more recent migration wave, which came in the 1800s after the fall of Wosulu Empire when Samori Touré was conquered.
This is 1834. I wonder what became of these children. Did they move on to work in the government or trade, or What do you
Different
think?
things. Some of them decided to, and this is I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate. I think if I was perspective of their parents, this was very tragic because they're sending their children to learn something and come home, and then when they go there, they find that lifestyle more conducive or more attractive, and then they abandon their ways and become, as we say, Kwi. And Kwi
Yeah.
not meaning civilized, but being foreign. Another thing, Kwi actually means foreign, not civilized. We use it to mean civilized today, but originally it just meant foreign. And it's theorized that it's a derivative of the word Portuguese. So people would just say the person say ki, the person comes from foreign, it comes from a faraway place. So it's not native to us, it's not natural to us, it's Kwi. It didn't initially mean civilized because our forefathers knew they were civilized. They hadn't been brainwashed into having an inferiority complex yet. So when they said Kwi, it didn't mean superior. They just meant different from ourselves and outside of ourselves. So if your children were going to the Kwi school, they become Kwi. They no longer practice your civilized ways. They're now practicing these foreign ways. And a lot of these young people, you see it a lot in Grand Cape Mount. You see it a lot among the Grable, where people then become westernized completely. And I mean, not completely. You can't completely be westernized in Africa. Even if you were born outside of Africa, you become very African when you're there. But, they become Kwi. They start wearing different clothes. They start going to church instead of the mosque. And so that was something that happened quite frequently.
Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson was a prominent figure in the territory's expansion of Liberia. He was instrumental in negotiating treaties, mapping the region, making contact with different polities, and taking note of untapped resources.
Yes. So polities as in nations, clans, um, within the interior districts. Anderson, who we did an episode, you can look for that in the History Channel library on YouTube. Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson was sent into the interior in 1868 to not only map the interior, but to make contact. And since they were constantly sending ambassadors to the coast, you go now into the interior and interact and meet the people and carry. They had gifts and everything, so he had to go all the way to Musadu. Now it's important to note that Musadu was considered the capital of the Western Mandingos, and this term Mandingo was really a blanket term for many people. So it gets very confusing. So you've got Madinka, you've got Vai, you've got when they get into Guinea, they're calling Soso people Madinko at some point. They even even see books from the 19th century where they're clearly describing people from Futa Jalan who are Fob or what we call Fula, and they're referring to them as Madingo. So this Madingo term is very much not an African word. It is a Western word with Europeans use to describe Madinka people and all of their related ethnic groups, especially if they're Muslim. And so that's where some of that confusion comes in. But Anderson was going to Musadu to meet with the Western Mandingos as opposed to the Eastern Mandingos. And who are the Eastern Mandingos? Those are the Mendi people and Muslim people in Nimba and Lofa. I mean, what would be Eastern Lofa, Nimba Bong. And then the western part of Lofa, Bopuru, going up to Musadu would be the Western Mandingos, according to Pearson and the Liberian people at that time.
In the name of Allah, the merciful and compassionate, O God, bless our Lord Muhammad and save him. This letter is from towns unto a town, from our town to your town. The name of our town is Musadu, that you may see what misfortunes have happened to our country, and carnage and slavery and hunger and poverty and every injury on account of the army.
So this is a letter, correspondence that was given to Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson. and which he brought with him back to Liberia, and Edward Wilmot Blyden translated into English. And this letter tells a story, because remember, this is a time period before the conquest of Africa, the partitioning of Africa, but it's during the conquest of Africa still. So you've got a lot of influences, wars happening, old alliances are breaking down. This is after the slave trade has completely been stomped out. There's issues happening in the north, across the Sahara. There's two things happening. The French are creeping in. So there's a lot of wars and calamity. The region is very unstable. Their way of life is changing forever. Their old alliances, their old trades, the way it's like almost an apocalyptic thing. Everything is being destroyed culturally. Their ancient trade relationships, business alliances have been completely severed. And so it causes a lot of instability, war and calamity. As he says, carnage and slavery and hunger and poverty. They didn't know these things before this period of degradation. So by the time Anderson goes up there, things are falling into chaos. Many times when Liberians talk about our history, we don't understand that the world had changed and that there was really no option except to fight. These things that are being described in the following excerpts from this letter are the things that led to Samori Toure rising up. These wars, this violence, this conquest from people who were coming from the north upon our people. This is what led a man like Samori Toure to rise up and raise an army to defend the Mendi people and create the Wosulu Empire. So this is 1868. This is before Samori Toure rose to power to defend his people. But this is describing the kind of situation that caused or made a man like Samori Toure necessary. So it wasn't only about French encroachment, but also the complete destruction of the society and the world as he knew it. So you can go to the next slide, please. So he's giving a little history here, a little background of who he is. He wants the Liberian government to know what's happening.
The king came forth from his town to our town. His name is Ibrahima Sisi, and his mother's name is Shiri Sisi, and his father's name Molu Sisi, and the name of his town and place of residence is Medina. His father traveled to your country, Masurado. At that time, there was a king in your country. His name was Amara. He gave to this king a wife and gave to all the people of the country plenty of money. Then he returned to his town and to his residence, Medina. God knows all things. God gave him many children and a large kingdom, and he fought for God. And God killed him, and he died in war. He left 9 male children. The name of his elder was Abdullah. He fought against the infidel, the Kafi, for God, and the enemies slew him, and he left his brother Ibrahim above mentioned.
That's a lot. It says a lot.
Now, Ibrahim, go ahead.
Well, let me ask you, do you have any questions about this? Because this is very heavy.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to finish, because I still don't know what's going on here.
Okay, so you want to read everything through and then we come back? Okay, no problem.
Yes, then we come back.
All right.
Now Ibrahima is king after them. He entered our town on a certain Tuesday. On that day, he came to us with horses and a numerous, overwhelming, and imprudent army, and entered upon an agreement with us and said, O ye people of the town of Mosadu, I have come with my army to fight against all those around you who are infidels or pagans. And we said, very well. And the king said, I see that the pagans have injured you, and I have seen my father Molusisi and my brother Abdullah, that they fought for God and the Muslims. And I said, I will humble them in battle, and there shall be no honor that a child should have his origin from the town of his parents. And the people of the town said, preserve thou our honor. Do not cause defilement or injury in our town. He said, very well. For this army will not injure anything except what I commanded. And the people said, do what pleases thee, for this town is thine. And the king said, I am going forth from our town, that I may fight the towns who troubled you, and fight the Kafri around you. Have you not heard the saying of the prophet, God bless him? I command that you fight men until they say there is no God but God. And they said, yes, we have heard it, and we know it. And they said, do what thou hast said. And when he perceived that the people of the town were pleased with his speech, he went with his numerous and arrogant army and fought against the people of a town called Bakna.
Yeah.
He returned to us and entered our walled town and our houses. When he perceived that the believers had cut off relations between themselves and the pagans, and had destroyed all marriage connections between them, and had destroyed friendship, he said to the leaders of the slaves, the number of the leaders of the slaves was 9. Fight, do not let the enemy gather one with another until they become numerous. Gather yourselves together and go around them and attack them on all sides. Everyone who attempts to escape capture for us, keep him or kill him. I will sit in the capital of the country, Mosadu, with numerous boys and a large army. And when the king saw fowls in the town, Mosadu, he took them, all goats, all sheep, all women. He took them for himself. And when he saw cows in the possession of anyone, he said, give them to me for the sake of religion. I will give you slaves. Seriously? When he said, companion of the faith, he struck them and captured them. And he said, these are the enemies of my father. And the people of the town said to him, desist, there is not in our town any money or food. Hunger has taken possession of us, and many of our children and slaves have either died or fled to our enemies on account of hunger. And all our rich men have become poor, and the poor have become numerous. Slaves have taken our female children to themselves without compensation. And when the king perceived the poverty of the people of the town, that they had neither money nor food nor power, he returned with his army to his own. That's Medina.
Yeah. So,
sad story.
Here's very sad story. And this is where you have ethnic conflict. So they were all Muslim, but you have Mendi people being attacked by people who are not Mendi, but they're Muslim. So I want you to, think about that for a second. And you have other Mendi people that these Muslim Mendi people have enslaved, and they're mocking them. They're saying, oh, you see your Muslim people, what they're doing to you, So Musadu was a place where a lot of Pele, Loma, and other ethnic groups were being suppressed by the Mandinka, who were Muslim.
Yeah.
And the Mandinka and Pele and all these people have a common origin. But here you have Muslims coming in now because things are being destroyed. You've got the Fulanis descending upon them with violence and other non-Mendi ethnic groups who have more power and more wealth. These names, Sisi, Amara, these are Muslim names. So it's very difficult to say which ethnicity they are, because any Muslim can use a Muslim name, just like any Christian can use John or David or Mark, right? So we can't say, oh, this person is Fulani, or this person is Madinka, or this person is Bambara, just because of the name. But what you can understand is what was happening at that time in the region is that you have the Fula people coming in and descending upon the Mendi people with violence and treachery, and without regard to whether or not they were Muslim. This is the environment that created Samori Toure. And this is one of the reasons why Samori Toure had his, what people call a scorched earth war to unite all of these Mendi ethnic groups under one umbrella, which was religion and language. This is where you see the expansion of the Madinka language and the Islamic religion, the Islamic faith. It is now that Samori says, and go back and watch the episode, everyone, you're no longer a slave, you are now a Muslim. You're no longer Lama, you're no longer Pele, you're no longer whatever, you are now Muslim. So it's the expansion of the language and the culture. So Wosulu was a true empire, because what they did was they conquered other people and made them like themselves. And this is one of the reasons you see so many different types of Madinka, because they just recently, in the context of history, became Madinka, or Madingo, as we say in Liberia, right? So if your people were Pele and Samori Toure conquered them, they're now Muslim and they're now Madingo, as we could say in Liberia. And it was because there was strength and unity.
Right.
Samori recognized the kinship between his people and was like, listen, we're the same. You just need to talk like us and you need to pray with us. That's what, this was his answer to fighting European encroachment and imperialism. This was his answer to fighting against the Fulani invasion. This was his answer to everything. And this is his history and the origin of the conflict. I mean, it's not the origin, but this is a long going on conflict between Fulani and Mendi-speaking people. It goes way back to when Futa Jalon was conquered. I think we've talked about that in other episodes, but I wanted to point that out. Is there anything? And I also found it interesting that Cisse's father, Amara, had been down to the coast to trade and negotiate himself as a king, because normally the kings themselves didn't go to the coast. They would send their representatives. But I found it interesting that Cisse's father, Amara, had gone, and that must have been quite a spectacle, because this is a very powerful king. Imagine the type of entourage he moved into Monrovia with.
Yeah.
And this is why when you read Stephen Allen Benson's speeches, when you read Daniel Bashir Warner's speeches, and even James Briggs Payne, when you read their speeches, they were in absolute awe and admiration of these people because of the kind of wealth and power they exuded when they came to the coast. Any other questions? Anything you read there that stands out?
And for those, you keep making reference to other episodes. So what I did, I put the playlist of the History Channel in the comment. So if you are watching,
that's very important.
Just so that you can refresh, you can click on the playlist and you'll be able to see all the Liberia History Channel episodes. So you can go back and forth. I mean, I just see how they trick the people and kill them.
Yeah, I mean, like people can say, dirty way, Yeah. They really, it was this. Liberia was established at a time of turmoil in West Africa. Liberia was not established at a time of peace and tranquility. Things were happening, bad things were happening. The world was changing. It was changing violently. It was changing traumatically. So much of the trauma of the rolling wars, we should learn about these things.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have to this day in the interior remnants of charred cities, walled cities in the rainforest that brush has overgrown, the jungle has covered. But when I worked for the Land Commission and we would go in the interior to map public lands, sometimes you come in the rainforest, you will see banana planting in the middle of the rainforest, and when you go check around it, you'll see the charred remains where you can say, wow, there was a town here at some time long ago that was burned. And the rainforest has overgrown it, and you can see artifacts to this day in our rainforest, in places that are isolated. There's no towns anywhere around there, nowhere around there. But there's remnants. And I always like to talk to hunters in Liberia that go venturing far away for days to travel to hunt and come back. When they explain some of these things, I say, yeah, I saw some things like that too when I was in the interior. Especially in places like Lofa and Nimba. You know, we talk about, oh, the places are densely populated. Yeah, but not really. There's a lot of empty space of rainforest where people don't inhabit, and you'd be surprised, you know, what artifacts and what remnants and ruins are still in those forests. And it's a testament to these rolling wars. All of our oral traditions have stories of these wars, these very violent, terrible wars. And this is what is being described here in this letter.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is the Liberia History Channel. Our topic, 19th century correspondence from the interior of Liberia. If you want to be a part of the conversation, please call the number on your screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791403#. It's history, and it is our story.
Yes, sir.
a lot to learn from, you know, things that happened before, and we have the history to prove it. And we have things to base our understanding on and really appreciate our past. But unfortunately, these things have not been taught. We don't know about them. And the only place you can find them is right here on the Liberia History Channel. Okay, there are other books, right? But a lot of people don't. And yeah, I think this is, let me see if we have a few comments here. Madison Camo is talking like Stephen Allen Benson now. He said, I have the honor to subscribe myself most respectfully. Legend can understand it when we're reading the letters.
But he said only legends can understand. I will start writing that. I gotta write Senator Dilla a letter that I will end it. I gotta write something for Senator Dilla. I could be any general.
Comfort Coley love this. Emmanuel Jackson said, really would like to attend history course in the future on Liberia. Good evening from Boston. Eddie, you say, good evening. Dr. Carl, great presentation, excellent program. John Dimo, good morning, folks. Thank you for the show. I'm watching from Lower Mount Gibby. Thank you. And Riverside Pro, of course. Thank you all for watching. We don't have a call thing. We can wrap it up. Let me make a few announcements here. But our callers, you still have the opportunity to call. Tomorrow at, tomorrow is Tough Talking Thursday. This is what comes your way every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. We want to talk about the road ahead of President Boakai, meaning after President-elect Boakai takes seat, the road ahead of him. We're going to be talking about that maybe if that will cause us to maybe manage expectation or have the same expectation, but we'll be discussing the road ahead of President Boakai tomorrow at 7:30. Then on Saturday, our series on moving the country forward will continue. That's Saturday at 1 p.m. We're going to be talking about higher education. Dr. Edison Pajibo will be joining us from Ghana, and Dr. Josh William will be joining us from here, and we talk about higher education. We've started this series because we say in order to move Liberia forward, what we need to do. So how can we improve higher education to move the country forward?
Yeah.
Then on Sunday, we're going to talk about peaceful coexistence. Someone said, well, with everything that we're talking about, if we don't, there are certain things that cause us to be at war with each other, to be angry with each other. So we need to peacefully coexist in order for us to move the country forward. This will be presented by Professor Nancy Reeves David, a clinical therapist who will be joining us from Ontario, Canada. You don't want to miss Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Right.
So, Dr. Carr, nobody's calling it. Okay, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Dr. Carr, so I mean, again, going back to this, I know these are just few of the many letters and correspondence. This is mainly concentrated to the north. Were there other correspondence coming from the south?
No, so the culture is different.
Okay.
And we talked about this. About the true, not the true, the oldest inhabitants, the longest inhabitants of the Grain Coast being the Kru-speaking people, the Klau ethnic group, the Grebo ethnic group, the what we call Basa and Day and Gola are very old to the region. Been there for a very long time. The culture is different. There is some influence from Islamic culture, but I'm not aware of any written correspondence. However, the interaction, and then I'm going to drop another show. If you watch Basel 360, it talks about the interaction and the communication. I want to believe that the language that they wrote, they were the first to write the Roman language, as far as I know, on the Grain Coast. They spoke English first, and they were speaking English long before Liberia was established, centuries. In fact, we had people on the coast speaking English and interacting with Europeans and learning to speak Portuguese and other languages. So that interaction on the coast started in the late 1400s, but really the 1500s and the 1600s is where it really took off. So by the 1700s, you had many westernized people living in places like Cape Palmas by the 1700s. And then places like Cape Mesurado were a combination of both. So Cape Mesurado being this really, really diverse hub where you had the influx of Mendi people from the north, and then the people on the coastal people, and then their interaction with Western culture, kind of all converging, because Cape Mesurado was more of a trading metropolis, very diverse. You can say that also somewhat about Cape Mount, what we call Robertsport today. Robert, this was another place that a lot of correspondence and cultural exchange happened, but not as much, I would say, as Cape Mesurado. Cape Mesurado is a very busy place. Also, along the Kavala River, River Sestos, Basel 360, that history really all takes place on the Sestos River and its environs. So the interaction between people on the Grain Coast is very old. It's not something recent. It wasn't 1822 that introduced strangers to the area. And when the strangers arrived in the area, they met diversity. There is no homogeneous or homogenous, as I prefer to pronounce the word. There's no homogeneous group of people called natives in Liberia. It is really one of the most overused terms. It's very, very, it's very anti-history. It's not accurate to just say, oh, we had native people. I mean, what does that mean? The tremendous diversity among this group that we throw together and call natives. It's like, you know, just when people say everybody's African. Yes, it's true, but let's talk about the diversity there. So the difference between a Glebo man and a person living in Bopu was not any different from the difference between a Glebo man and somebody like Stephen Allen Benson. The cultural differences were great among the people that we put into one group and called native. So the people who returned were different, but the people who were there were also different from one another. Everybody was not the same. So what the Republic does now as a country, it puts everyone under an umbrella. And so you have a strength now in our diversity, but it is only a strength if we recognize our citizenship and each other as our fellow countrymen. So the diversity is a strength, but only if it's done from a place of unity. Because there's no strength in fragmentation. It's bringing these different things together and making them greater. You know, out of many, Liberia has become.
Thank you, Carl. And we want to thank our viewers. Let's wrap it up. What will be your closing? What really can we learn from these correspondents from the interior?
The first thing is that there was correspondence, that our people were literate, that people could read and write. The same way we learned from Bassa 360, that when the people arrived, they had met people who were interacting with Europeans and speaking English before the transatlantic slave trade commenced. So this is very important. So before anybody was ever even taken into slavery, we had people on the Grain Coast speaking English and interacting with outsiders. So we have never been some isolated population. And I like to use the derogatory term of booga boogas, you know, drum beating booga boogas, you know, living in the swamp. That's not who we've ever been. So that's the first thing. The second thing is dispelling this myth of some massive illiterate population. Here you have complex people who are not only reading and writing a script, but reading and writing their own languages in the script, not just Arabic. So I always hear people say, oh, they were just chanting Islamic verses, they were only learning the Quran, they were not learning actual literacy. That is not true. Clearly, it's not true. If you can write a letter and explain a war and the conflict that's happening, clearly you're not just memorizing Islamic script. And if a student who is learning English can use the Arabic script to write the English language,
right,
as he's learning it, it shows you the level of literacy our people had before the coming of Western people, right? So if there's anything you learn from this is that dispel, you know, the myth of the savage Grain Coast. The Grain Coast was an enlightened place, a diverse place of different cultures and different people that had been existing and interacting on a global scale for centuries. And the documented history proves it. And also this idea that our people did not write our own history is false.
Thank you so much. On that note, we're going to be closing the broadcast tonight. Join us again next Wednesday at 7:30 for the Liberia History Channel. We will post during the week the topic that we'll be covering. Thank you for watching. And even those who will watch later, always is focused on Liberia. Until then, we close with our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Have a good night and God bless you.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia. Liberia.